Welcome to the Eating at a Meeting podcast. I'm your host, Tracy Stuckrath, dietary needs expert, certified meetings manager, certified food protection manager. I have searched the globe to find people and businesses who are creating safe, sustainable, and inclusive food and beverage experiences for their employees, guests, and communities. In each episode, you will find authentic conversations about how food and beverage impacts inclusion, sustainability, culture, community, health, and wellness. I know that sounds like a lot, but we're going to cover it all. Are you ready to feed engagement, nourish inclusion, and bolster your bottom line? If so, let's go. Today's guest actually reached out to me a few weeks ago saying, hey, I wrote a book about food and I want to talk to you about it on your podcast. And I'm like, okay, let's check this out. Well, I am so glad that I checked her out. She is phenomenal. And Kathiana LeJeune is an author, a gastrodiplomatic thought leader, and a culinary enthusiast who is enthralled by the ways food can serve as a means of unity across cultural differences. And we're going to talk about what all that means. But it's something that I've been chatting about probably for the last year and a half, because there's so many ways that food is part of our lives. So welcome to the show, Kathiana.
Thanks for having me, Tracy. Hi, everyone.
Yeah. Hey, everybody. So, and your book, we need to talk about your book, The Power of the Palate Through the Great Exchange. So the power of the palate I get, but what's the great exchange?
The great exchange is the conversations. It's the dining experiences that we have that amplify our palates when we go out and eat and go out and just have dinner with friends. It's a chance for us to just come together and evolve. So that is through the great exchange.
Okay. I love that because it's when you break bread and you sit down and have a conversation with somebody over food, so many things can change. And you brought that up in a couple of your chapters about how even government dinners actually change relationships and foster unity. So do you have any examples that you can talk about in the book that you thought of?
So one of the main stories that I talk about is about my good friend, Vyacheslav Patuskin. I got the chance to work with Vyacheslav back in 2018 throughout 2019 at work, and he was the former Moldovan ambassador. And he told me about the story of him meeting up with a Ukrainian ambassador where they were able to share this. It's a sort of bread called Mama Malanga. And that was instantly a memory that struck for both him and the other Ukrainian ambassador. And they were able to discuss about their history and their culture and how because they come from like the Romanian Empire before they broke off, there was that historical component and the preparation of it. And that those similarities was able to create, in a way, like a soft power to ease the conversation of what they had to negotiate and was able to sign policy. And so I'm like, if governments or diplomats can be able to do this, then we can do this in our day-to-day conversations with each other or business relations. And move forward that way. And so I love it.
Yeah. I mean, because America or the US food came, we brought food here, food was brought to Germany from different places. And so the different stories and cultures that have developed around food or how a food has changed because of its new demographic can really spark some conversations.
Yeah. And even from a cultural standpoint, I talk about my Haitian background and how there's still French influence in Haitian cuisine. There's French influence in Vietnamese cuisine. Back in 2017, I got a chance to travel to Ho Chi Minh City and Mekong Delta to study abroad. And I was able to see those similarities. But the way that they have their banh mi sandwiches, it's kind of like a French baguette with all like the Vietnamese flavors in terms of like carrots and Spam or sardine or chicken being in that sandwich with cilantro and jalapenos, and it tastes amazing. And I'm like, I could definitely see us doing the same in Haiti and creating a sandwich that way, and making it something that's awesome with the French lineage that's there. And I try not to look at negative connotations of colonization. Well, there is sadness and some sort of remorse from us now millennials who's looking back and saying, well, this is wrong and maybe history shouldn't have played out that way. But the beauty that comes from it is that cultural aspect, and the food that was left behind and the history that was left behind and what people were able to, in a way, make lemonade out of. Like it wasn't all sour and bitter lemons. So today we're able to have all these different fusions that stems from the past. And so, yeah.
I love that. That's a really good analogy and a way to look at it and think about, granted, there was lots of bad things that have happened, in our history, but the way that we use food, and just before we got on the show, we were talking about refugees and, no matter where they're going, they find the comfort in their meals, whether it's sitting down with family or meeting new friends, they're using their food to connect with others, saying, hey, try this or try that. Right. And they think they're moving to new places. And so they're sharing their food traditions in different demographics.
Yeah. In the book, there's a chapter, I believe it's chapter 4, where I talk about true transparency and tradition, and how I created a punny subtitle where I said it's old place plus old spice equals home. And they're able to create or recreate moments from their homeland, using spices that they're familiar with, that they brought back from overseas. So recreate moments that are memorable and brings them back to that old place. And that's what we define as home. When we first get a new place right out of college, right, we're like finding knickknacks or candles or bowls that like replicate our upbringing, and what we're accustomed to. And that draws us back, and that creates somewhat of an emotional connection with us and our past. And so there's all that lies there. And food is one of the things that's able to create that moment.
You also look for mom's recipes or grandma's recipes when you're in that new apartment, right? You're like, hey, mom, how did you make this? Right. And you're looking for that. So you're bringing that in and sharing that with your new, classmates or whatever, or whomever. So tell me, how did you come to write the book? What instigated you to write this book?
So my book idea was initially a show idea. I was thinking of a show being, after watching Jada Pinkett Smith Red Table Talk. So creating a show that's flip opposite, that is like a taste of peace at the world table, where you would bring two individuals from two different conflicting countries. So let's say Haiti and Dominican Republic, or Israel and Palestine. That's a hot topic right now. Or let's say India and Pakistan. You bring them to the table, to upstanding members of society that are either influencers or those who people respect that aren't politicians. You bring them to the table, you talk about the history of those two countries, because oftentimes the tension / issues that lie at hand is because of the misunderstanding of history. And so you have a quick history lesson, and you have a dish that brings those two cultures together. And funny story, what I find is that cultures who are at conflict are very similar in their dining habits and recipes. Like you find like similar dishes. And it's like one step that was removed from the other one to make it easier or quicker or savorier or sweeter. You're able to fuse those dishes together, and you bring in an expert who could give them action steps to take from that moment on, and talk about their differences, but also embrace it. And so that was my idea of a show. And
that's awesome.
My mentor from Georgetown University Eric Kosner, he reached out to me and asked me if I wanted to write a book. And I shared the show idea with him, and he said, well, why don't you call it The Power of the Palate? And my response to him was, it only happens through the great exchange. And so that's how I got the topic, and that's how I started. And at the time, I was still a United Nations Associations fellow. And one of our seminary teachers, she'd always talk about the concept of Ubuntu. And basically that means I am because you are, and you are because I am. And I was all like, well, that makes perfect sense. And that EQ, like emotional quotient that's there, and emotional intelligence that's there with food, that's able to break barriers. And so I talked about it, and that's how we have the power of the palate today.
That is amazing. So, and we don't think food we take for granted. And there's one quote in the book that you use that I use all the time, and it's James Beard. Food is our common ground. It's a universal experience. And that's chapter 5, where community and food. And, no matter if you're at a meeting or an event, or, you're having people over, into your college dorm or whatever, it does bring us together. And I think that gastrodiplomacy, which is, a new term to a lot of people. I've talked to Joanna about it from American University, but I think it's something that we also need to think about so much more. And Eric Wolf from World Food Travel Association, right?
Yes.
He and I have chatted, and he's going to be on the show in a couple of weeks, but we travel for the food. We want to go see the sights, but we also traveled for those experiences.
Yeah.
And go ahead.
No, you can continue.
So have you seen in the research for the book, and I love the fact that you have all of these references in the back, which make it really easy for people to go back and read the stories that you researched, for the book. But do you feel that countries are using the gastrodiplomacy a lot more than they had in the past, where do you see it going forward?
Well, in terms of countries, I can't speak to that much. I do know of diplomats who used gastrodiplomacy or culinary diplomacy as a soft power for negotiation. But in business relations, I know businesses use it all the time in terms of hosting business dinners, or lobbyists taking their clients out to dinner to have the casual conversation before proceeding in business relations or friendships. And one big thing that I talk about in the book, outside of it being used as a soft power from a government standpoint, is mentorship, or someone that's looking for a job. You seek out a potential employer in pre-COVID. You invite them to coffee, and that coffee, it symbolizes you taking more than a sip of iced coffee or cappuccino or whatever you enjoy. And you talk about yourself, and you get to know them before saying, well, I'm also interested in pursuing a career at your company, and how can I get in? But that's a common way that people kind of cut through the cold butter. Like, that's the warm knife that people use to make it comfortable or easier to talk to, because I don't think anyone's going to argue over good food. Right. I certainly don't. In my family, we're huge college football fans, and everyone is all across the SEC. But we watch it at our house, and then we come together Thanksgiving dinner, and everyone's talking about, well, who made this mac and cheese, or who made this fried turkey? No one talks about what happened 15, 20 minutes ago at the game, because there's something that's there that's greater, that brings us together. That is our common ground. And so from relationship perspective, food is something that people use oftentimes to like smooth the rough edges of relationships. Right. And I feel that our government can do the same. I'm currently studying so that I can become a diplomat. in one of my essays, I hope to unveil the concept of gastrodiplomacy and talk about its efficiency and effectiveness in relationship building and engaging others and bringing them to the table. Linda Thomas Greenfield, who's currently the UN to US ambassador, if I have that correct, she uses the concept of gumbo diplomacy, where she invites people over to make gumbo. And,
wow.
And they talk. And I think it's amazing in that more diplomats and ambassadors should bring people over for dinner as a cultural immersion experience, but also a chance to understand one another. And that's kind of where we come back to that concept of Ubuntu, because if you're able to relate to me with a specific dish, then I'm able to relate to you, and we can talk beyond the dish. And so, yeah, that's how I see it working in our governments. That's how I see it working in our relationships and friendships, and we can go from there.
That's so important. And, I'm thinking of incentive trips. I'm going to Los Cabo next week on incentive trip. And when you go on trips, whether it's for business or for pleasure, you want to experience it. And it's always, you want to eat like a local, right? Or you want to visit the city like a local. And that's learning their culture. And their culture is their food. And it's really, and people always want to say, I want to eat in a dive bar because that's the authentic food. You don't want to eat at the ones that are on the main strip that all the tourists go to. You want to find those dive authentic, meals to enjoy with the locals.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah.
My good friend Manal, who I interviewed in her stories in the book, she talks about how when she studied abroad, that they would make dishes that replicated her home dishes, and that sometimes they would have restaurants tones down the spices or the spice levels of dishes and don't make it the most authentic way because of the fear of people's acceptance of their culture.
Okay.
But I find that those of us who travel to immerse ourselves to understanding the other culture and not going on the main strip and going to the hole in the wall restaurants, that we're willing to try the spice and the heat that's there, and willing to try something that's new and that's different, that challenges us to be better and be better world travelers. And so, and it becomes a part of our story, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I oftentimes, after my travels, would come back home and replicate the dish to the best of my ability. It'll never be the same because I think the water is different, one, and my spice game is probably different, but I do my best, and I feel like my friends enjoy it. My roommates definitely enjoy it. So, yeah, that's always fun.
I want to introduce you to my friend Allie Bond because she travels the world to eat, but she's got major food allergies. And so she's always on the lookout for, eating she's traveled, I don't know how many countries, but she's always educating people on how to travel with food allergies, but experiencing that food culture for wherever she is.
Yeah.
And how to communicate that. That I think the three of us need to have that conversation together.
I would love that.
Okay, so one of the things that I also love that you talk about in the book is that you're Haitian and your Southern background, and how those mesh, and learning the recipes from your grandmothers from Haiti, and then incorporating that into your Southern lifestyle that you have now, and you're in Atlanta, and I know there's really good mixture of all different types of food in Atlanta, but talk to me, how does that play into your palate? And let's talk about the palate, because I did say to people, when we promoted this, is how is your palate developed, and so talk to me about that.
Definitely. Well, I'm currently based in DC, but
okay, that's true.
And growing up, I feel like I lived the best of both worlds because my family moved to the United States and became citizens back in the late 1980s, before I was even thought of. But through that, they were able to always host dinners and learn about the American holidays. So their first Thanksgiving was all Haitian dishes. And we joke around and laugh about that, but the way that we prepare a turkey is completely different than your traditional stuffed turkey. And over the years, because of marriage, because of other people that we've embraced as family, they've introduced us to more Americanized dishes like casseroles and other things that kind of brings it all together. And it really tastes good when you bring in a squash casserole that my Aunt Janice would make. Her recipes in the book, shameless plug. But a casserole that she would make, and pairing it with the sauce that my mom would make the turkey out of. And it's delicious. And any person that we invite over for Thanksgiving or Christmas dinner, they're always talking about how all of these things come together beautifully. And I'm grateful that my uncles, they all had different variations in terms of like who they like and who they didn't like. And out of the 6 of them, 3 of them married American Southern women, and African American Southern women, and they spoiled us with soul food throughout. And soul food has a special place in my heart. And I feel like the soul part of it is the same with like Caribbean flavor in terms of like how long it takes to cook everything, how much love is poured into a dish. My cousins, we all joke around about how when it's our first time making a dish that my grandma would make or that my mom would make, how long it takes us. And we take that for granted every single time because we're here to eat and it tastes amazing, but we don't think about the preparation process and how they have to start a couple of days before to get things ready, to chop things or to make a roux and the importance of that. And that kind of like allowed me to embrace other cultures that were different from my own, and allowed my palate to be elevated, because I'm not accustomed to one dish. If you come to any of our family gatherings, you'll find Haitian dishes, you'll find American Southern dishes, you'll find soul food, depending on who we invite, there'll be a Puerto Rican dish, there'll be a Dominican dish, but there'll be something at the table that you're not used to. But when you put it on your plate and you add it to whatever else you're eating, especially if you don't mind your food touching. Now, if you mind your food touch, then eat them independently, but it all tastes amazing. And you're just like in awe of how good it all is. And so I think that's like my Haitian and Southern piece, and definitely moving up to the DC metro area, I try to either make dishes myself and have my friends over, or find restaurants that brings me back to that place. And there's a couple that I enjoy and am a regular customer at. And I love it. And it reminds me of home, and it goes back to that community piece. It makes me feel that I'm a part of something that's bigger than myself. And being in a place that's so transient of people moving all the time, right, it brings me closer to some. And we can all joke around, and it creates a memory of, remember the time where we all watched Freaky Friday and had Chinese takeout to kind of like relate to the movie. And those are just moments that we talk about at weddings or talk about at go away parties and reminisce on at our low moments or at our high moments. And so it all comes together.
I like the fact that you said the movie. Okay, so it was Freaky Friday, like the original one? Or
Lindsay Lohan. I think is there one before that?
Yes.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that.
One from my decades, yes. So there's an event I attended, it was hosted by the International Live Events Association under its previous name, International Special Events Association, in our society. And it was a Stanley Tucci movie of 2 brothers who cooked, and the event was held in a theater, and we watched the movie. And then we would take breaks and we would go out, and the catering company had made what they had just made in the movie.
That's awesome.
And so, and I mean, that was 25 years ago, and it was, I don't remember what we ate, but I need to go back and watch that movie. I think it was The Big Night. But that's another way that they used food to bring in the culture and, and the movie and aspects. And we got to sit down with each other outside of the dark theater to enjoy what was going on in the movie theater. So, and it's just a whole nother way to experience food. Now, one of the you've got 9 concepts in the book. Can we run through and actually I want you to show a copy of your book. I have it digitally, so I don't have I can't show it myself, but show everybody the book, The Power of the Palate. Okay, nice. I like that.
My camera quality is not so great, but
you're good. And I'll put a link in for everybody to be able to get that book on Amazon, because it is available now for everybody to read. But so can you walk us through the different concepts that you have in the book and how food is, how our palates are related through the food?
Sure.
Does that make sense? Yeah.
Yes, it does. So there are 4 different parts within the book. And the first part, I talk about history. So when I was talking about cultural imprints that countries leave through colonization or when people move, and what they leave behind and how people are able to preserve that through their dining experiences or food. So I talk about the history of it all and taking people back a step. And appreciating it more. And then I go into how that brings us together, and how food is more than just satisfying hunger, and how it plays as a catalyst of bringing people together. And from that, I talk about cuisines and cultural identity and how we all have a race identity or a background identity of how we grew up or what we signify as our norm, and how that aligns with different cuisines and how different places are unique. And so I try to refrain from calling the U.S. a melting pot, because it's not. It's more than that. And every culture is independent in its own way, and we are able to be us in that way, because we're not the same, we're all different. And I choose to honor that instead of saying that we all come together and we all mesh well. Not exactly. And so paying homage and respect through that. And then I go into how food is more than satisfying our hunger and how it's memory. And talking about the meal and memory component and the important role that food plays in terms of like connecting us throughout sad moments. Like if you go through a hard breakup, your friend's going to bring you brownies or ice cream or something to help you feel better, and you find comfort or some solace in the dish. Or if someone passes away, you can expect a casserole or a nice dish to help you get through it, or at least have a meal in your stomach, because half the time we're not eating during those moments. Or if you're sick, like someone's going to bring you soup or some nice tea so that you can get better. And so it serves as a memory, and our meals are more than something that I ate dinner, so let's check off the box today.
Right.
And then, like we shared before, my Truth, Transparency, and Traditions chapter, where I talk about how we all move to new places, but what makes it home is bringing in those old spices. And I interview Chef Reina Gascon-Lopez, who's has her own like nonprofit / cooking page. And so you all should go check her out on Instagram. But she talks about her Puerto Rican heritage and how she's able to combine that in South Carolina, and the Gullah history that's there, and finding similarities in the African roots of Puerto Rico and of South Carolina, and combining those dishes together. And so I talk about that. Then I go into the huge community and food aspect, which we've discussed previously in this conversation. And so I won't dive in too much about that. And then I talk about the history of food and peace, and how food is able to make amends amongst nations. Food is able to make amends amongst people once they're able to come to the table. And I lean into that through the story of the Last Supper and how that was an important moment for us to learn and grow and be who we are today. And then I talk about the Savory Shift.
So there's 11 chapters in the book, 4 parts, 11 chapters. And it's, I really do like how you've pieced it out and are guiding us through the value of food and the value of the palate and how we, because even when you were talking a few minutes ago, the time that it takes to make the food, and even when we go to an event, right? So the Met Gala was the other night, right? All the prep that went into that gala, whatever that food was served, whether it was the reception or sitting down to the dinner, it took a bunch of people, a long time to prep that food and dice those carrots and whatever to get there. And I wonder how much was actually thought about the food at that dinner. Yeah, right?
It's a huge piece that goes into it, especially in the entertainment business.
Right.
You want your guests to feel welcome. You want your guests to be happy. And so you want to appease their palates. And that's one way to go about it. And so the huge part outside of planning the photographers and planning the red carpet and where people are going to stand, the invitations and everything, is the hospitality side of the food and the dining experience and making something that's memorable, especially at places like the Oscars. Those plates are, I believe it's over $100 each plate, if I'm not mistaken.
I'm sure it is.
It's time to goes into that. And so, and us who's watching the Oscars, we don't think about the dinner piece because we're not there to partake in that. And so, that a lot, I believe, went into thinking and formulating a plan to make it something that's exquisite and fabulous and memorable.
So you were talking about the Savory Shift. So what is that?
So I talk about how our perspectives change throughout time when we allow our palates to try new things. And I give a personal story about myself and how I used to hate potatoes. I know how un-American of me. But as a kid, I don't know, like that's something that I would be forced to eat, and something that I couldn't leave on my plate as much as I'd want to. It would be like, no, you're going to eat this, and this goes part of your meal, and it's a good, at the time, vegetable, my grandmother thought, but it's a starch. Love you, Grandma. Well, she's my late grandmother, but I didn't like that. But it wasn't until my freshman year of college, I'd go to the dining hall with my friends and I expressed my dislike for things like mashed potatoes, mostly because of the texture. As a kid, I just didn't like the way that it looked / felt. So it was hard for me to eat. I'd eat French fries, but mashed potatoes or like baked potatoes was just hard for me. But going to the dining hall and eating, and one night they so happened to have these red potatoes that were mashed. And it paired nicely with, I think they were serving fried chicken that night, if I'm not mistaken. But Marymount, their dining hall was very interesting to say the least in terms of good dishes. And so this night, everyone was talking about the mashed potatoes. And I was like, well, maybe I could suck it up and try it. And I try. And honestly, my friends were shocked that I did because they knew my dislike for it. And I gave it a try and I liked it. So much so that I make my own rosemary garlic mashed potatoes now, and it's a hit. Every single time I make it.
That sounds delicious.
So that recipe is also in the book. And so my palate was able to shift in that moment because I was able to shift my perspective and acceptance of potatoes. And other people do it too.
Right.
in terms of like accepting who they are / accepting a dish that's put in front of them. And sometimes it's culture shock, but it turns out that we like it and we enjoy it, and we're able to tell stories about it later.
I wish people would do that more when we talk about vegan food or gluten-free foods as well, because there's some non-vegan food and non-gluten-free food that doesn't taste the best, but and granted all of these foods, but we have to think about, when we're thinking about our palates, we have to think about that concept of food and beverage as well.
Great.
So in that part 2, then you talk about seasonal spreads. Is that just talking about seasonality and where you are in the world, or what is that?
Seasonal spreads are recipes that I share in the book. So I include entrees, appetizers, salads, desserts, cocktails of all of the different seasons. So you can find fall recipes, summer, spring, and winter of all those different things that I just listed. And some are family recipes, others were inspired, and others are my own recipe. But something that I add in all is that you add a pound of love to whatever you make, and I promise that it will taste better. Just a pound. That's all you need. If you add more, then it'll be even better. But if you start with a pound, then it'll be beautiful and it'll taste great. So
the strawberry, watermelon, radish, and goat cheese. Oh my gosh, those are all things that I absolutely love. Does the strawberry actually help bite or help minimize the bite that some watermelon radishes have, or does the cheese?
Yes. And it helps with the balance of the cheese. Like when you go to a winery and they give you a charcuterie board, oftentimes they give you berries because that pairs nice with what the dressing what the drink is, not in this case dressing. It helps ease the bites of what you're eating and adds a level of sweetness to it. And so that's why I shared that recipe, and it's really tasty. I highly recommend.
Well, and then the other one that caught my eye was the apples and Brussels sprouts. And that season is coming up. So oh my gosh, I'm so excited. I just actually bought a whole bunch of apples to make some applesauce the other day. And then Jennifer Garner's like, you need to add kale to your applesauce. So I need to.
That's different.
I know. And it's part of her Once Upon a Farm. One of the best-selling vegetable things I think she has is kale and applesauce. Yeah. So anyways, I digress. Talking about food. We can go in all kinds of directions talking about food. Part 3, what's part 3 in the book about? You've got impact and exchange and pleasing palates and appeasing people. What is that all about?
That's a social part of dining. So in the chapter that I talk about impact and exchange, that's about establishing your business opportunities, using food as a soft power. And I dive into that a little bit more in the pleasing palates, appeasing people's chapter, but it creates an opportunity for me to talk more about gastrodiplomacy or culinary diplomacy and how that all works, and tying it together. I talk about mimosas and brunch and how we all come together through that and how we're able to make different impacts in our community through food. One of the stories that I share is about Pinky, who is the founder/owner of the Slutty Vegan burger joints that's across Atlanta. And how when her restaurant burned down, the community came together to help her build that back up again. Last summer, back in 2020, with the Black Lives Matter riots, she had put out a statement that she was not giving police officers free meals, and people were bashing her on Google and on Yelp and trying to bring her business down. But what amazing talent and actors and actresses and rappers, and what they did was paid for over 1,000 people in the city of Atlanta to eat for free that day. And when I say that, we stood in line, me, my little sister, and one of my closer cousins, Jaden, we stood in line for 2 hours, which I don't stand in line for a long time, especially not in Georgia heat. But it was worth it because I felt like we were doing something and putting a stake in the ground to say that we're not standing for this and we're going to do something that's more impactful. And it just so happened to be through food. And so I talk about that in that chapter, and I talk about how there are other ways that we are able to make an impact, and let food be the base of it. And so that's what I talk about in the impact and exchange. And then in the pleasing palates, appeasing people, I talk about business relations and opportunities.
Mm-hmm.
How businesses are able to use food as a catalyst of bringing partners and people together, and how governments are able to use it as a soft power to just soften the blows. And I talk about I think it was the UN a while ago. They had this huge gala and dinner, and one of the ambassadors stated how food should be the new form of diplomacy, and kind of co-signed my theory of how this all should work. And so I talk about that a little bit. And then in part 4, I go into taking the final bite and giving a tangible example of how we can use culinary diplomacy, or how we could use gastrodiplomacy in our daily lives, or to advocate. And that was a big piece of my master's program. I did global advocacy. And so that was a chance for me to shed light on how I think that we're able to use it abroad for special issues and cases, or elections, and bringing people to the table. So,
well, and I, for some reason, it just reminded, I know Guy Ferrari, you quoted at the very beginning, but World Central Kitchen, I think, is a total epitome of that, right? And making sure that, food is served to everybody, no matter where they are in the world, because of a disaster, right? And showing that, because we all have to eat, and we need to, even in a natural disaster, we need to make sure that we're being fed. And thank goodness for World Central Kitchen and the other organizations out there that are helping make sure that people have the food, and, that are traditional as well, wherever they are, but, and going to them versus making them come, someplace else. So, oh my gosh, you are a millennial, and I am so excited and just for everybody to know, when Kathiana and I chatted, she wasn't born when I graduated from college or moved to Atlanta. So I just love the fact that you're going to be one of our leaders in diplomacy and how we're using, how we can come together. And the fact that you're using food to do that just makes my heart smile. So feel good. So thank you. So we are coming up on 45 minutes, woman. We could talk for so long about this, and I think it's an important topic that we need to talk about so much more. But we're gonna have to do that on another show. Okay. So before we end, I have posted a link to your website, or to Amazon, for people to find the book, and it didn't go on one page. I don't know. Well, I'll make sure everybody gets it though. But where can they find you otherwise?
So I have a website. It's KathianaLeJeune.org.
Mm-hmm.
And there's also my Instagram. I have 2 Instagram pages, my personal page, and also a food page where I post recipes from time to time. So there's that. And there's also a Facebook page. That's the landing page of my book, which will be changing soon because I am now working on my second book. And so it'll just be my author page. And so there's that. There's those, I think, 3 or 4 ways that you can connect with me / reach out.
Okay, perfect. And I am putting all of those links in the chat here now. We've got some love here from Paula and Mildred. Thank you so much. I think she's related to you just for the fact of her last name. But yeah, so thank you, Mildred and Paula, for being here.
And Paula is my best friend from college.
Okay, awesome. Thanks, ladies, for being here. So one final question that I have for you. In all of this gastrodiplomacy and education and the recipes that you shared with us, do you have a favorite food or beverage that you consume regularly?
Well, as of late, my favorite dish has to be oxtails, rice and peas, and plantains and ginger beer. I don't know why I'm like obsessing over red meat as of late, but that's like my go-to, as well as Korean barbecue. I've been able to establish great community over that. And just, cooking a meal with friends around a huge table and partaking in that. So it's great.
That's so awesome. And are a lot of your friends eating the oxtails as well?
I'm not sure. I know my family does, not my mom, because she's pescatarian, but my aunt, she makes a really nice oxtail, and so does my mom. So fun fact before we all head off from here, although my mom is pescatarian, she preps meat regardless if it's red meat or chicken or turkey. She does it very well. And it always tastes amazing. And sometimes it's better than like anything else that I've had. And so it's pretty neat, but that's what I've been obsessing over as of late. And that's like my number one dish. Now, if you talk to me in November, all of my favorite dishes will have to replicate Thanksgiving, fall and squash and pumpkin and all those things.
Okay, awesome. Well, and I love the fact that our favorite dishes change with the seasons as well, right? And I think that's an important thing to understand with our palates and our taste buds too. So, my dear, I thank you so much for reaching out to me at the beginning. And I am so glad that I know you. And everybody, you need to read Kathiana LeJeune's book, Power of the Palate. And you can get it on Amazon. I have the link in the comments. Somebody else just commented real quick. Lynn Welsh says, I love a good pescatarian. Yes, that's a good. Pescatarians are good people, and as well as the vegans who make, do the same thing. So everybody, thank you so much for listening in. Kathiana, we will catch up soon. And we will definitely be on the lookout for your second book. Awesome. And everybody check it out. Until the next time, stay safe and eat well. Make sure you join the Eating at a Meeting Facebook group on Facebook, and to stay up in tune to what's going on with the podcast. But we are here, LinkedIn and Facebook, every single Wednesday at 12 noon. Until then, till next time, stay safe and eat well. Thanks for listening to the Eating at a Meeting podcast, where every meal matters. I'm Tracy Stuckrath, your food and beverage inclusion expert. Call me and let's get started right now on creating safe and inclusive food and beverage experiences for your customers, your employees, and your communities. Share the podcast with your friends and colleagues at our Eating at a Meeting Facebook page and on all podcast platforms. To learn more about me and receive valuable information, go to tracystuckrath.com. And if you'd like more information on how to feed engagement, nourish inclusion, and bolster your bottom line, then visit eatingatameeting.com.